Hello kind people, welcome to my very fancy video about Fat Non playing with you. It is Derek, welcome back to One More Mana, and we're getting into another deck tech. Y'all might notice I kind of have a fancier looking setup going on right now. I did move my quarantine bubble for a little while, so the next few videos are going to look a little bit different. But same ridiculous deck techs, same spicy commanders, and with Commander Legends out right now, there are so many spicy commanders that we're going to be going on that for a while. And today's deck tech is actually on a deck, one of my personal decks that has been together the longest, that has gone through a million different versions. I've done a lot of these versions already, just all of them, and it's all around my girl Vial Smasher. So now if you want any of the amazing cards in this deck, or really just any of the amazing Commander Legends cards, get all those foil edged cards, alternate arts, full arts, you can finally get those full art Finhorn elves that we've all been waiting for, head on over to TCG Player. TCG Player is going to have anything at all you could want, any type of card, any version of a card, and if you use the affiliate link down in the description below, it'll help support the channel. We really do appreciate all the help. But now jumping back into Vial Smasher. Vial Smasher, she's my baby. I have been playing with Vial Smasher basically since the year that those 2016 precons came out. I initially had a Vial Smasher Thrasios deck. Basically I learned what Magic was, I learned what Commander was, I watched an episode of Game Nights, saw Josh Lee Kwai destroying people with this little feisty goblin, and I knew what I wanted. So that Vial Smasher Thrasios was my original build. It's gone through so many versions. I've had Innistradian, I've had the Rayhan, which is a deck tech I've done before. I've basically tried every combinations of colors, but one of the things I struggled with most was finding the perfect partner. I wanted a partner that would focus on Vial Smasher, that would really just showcase what Vial Smasher could do without itself becoming the focus. With Thrasios, so many games, Thrasios was so scary, it was the focus of what was going on. When I played Innistradian, it just didn't do anything. At that point, I might have had a Prismatic Piper, and there would have been no difference. And there's also, with Rayhan, that deck kind of moved into a big combat attacky direction, which I thought was super fun, but it wasn't the Vial Smasher experience that I wanted. And with Commander Legends, it kind of re-inspired me to go a different direction, and that's Grixis. And now this is going to be a weird deck tech in the sense there's going to be 3 different commanders for this deck. It's going to be the exact same 100 cards, but you can honestly pick any 3 of these commanders. The new fancy, shiny, beautiful one that we're probably the most excited about as a collective Magic community is going to be Sakashima. That new legendary Sakashima is insane, and that's going to be probably the primary partner for this deck tech on kind of how I'd recommend, just because it's just a new shiny thing, everybody wants to give it a try. And if you're not familiar with, well, let's just get a rundown of Vial Smasher too, just in case at this point you're not familiar. Vial Smasher, like I said, a feisty goblin, 1 a black and a red for a 2/3 goblin that basically whenever you cast your first spell each turn, you throw damage equal to its CMC to an opponent chosen at random, or you can redirect it to one of their planeswalkers, which I'm very glad that text is finally on the new version of the card, because not very obvious based on the initial version of the card. So that's really what we want. We want big spells. We don't want to pay much mana. We want to punch people in the face with vials. That's really the whole point. Now this partner thing. So with Sakashima, obviously we're just going for clones. We want to have Sakashima as a clone. Initially, I wanted to go all clones. I wanted clones everywhere. I wanted to have 5, 6, 7 copies of Vial Smashers out going crazy. But one thing that I realized was a fatal flaw in that was the fact that Vial Smasher herself is obviously a legend, and Sakashima gives you that sort of exemption from the legend rule, so to speak, but it's all dependent on Sakashima. Meaning, if you make 6 different copies of Vial Smasher, someone's single target removals of your Sakashima, everything's gone. They just like 6 or 7 for one you just spent all this mana for nothing. So it just seemed too glass cannon for me. I do want to have some cloning effects, so we're going to be running, we'll get into it when we see the creatures. We are running some cloning effects, but I didn't want to focus on that aspect of Sakashima. I still want it to be a Grixis Vial Smasher deck who just so happens to have a 2nd copy in the command zone. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 for our commander is going to be Ludovic Necro Alchemist. Now Ludovic is an awesome card. This one is, so basically with Sakashima, that is all in on Vial Smasher. You just want vials popping everywhere, popping off. Now, if you want Ludovic, this is a much more political deck. Ludovic is going to basically be the type of thing where it's just there for some card advantage throughout the game and kind of a way to incentivize your opponents to attack each other. That's the best case scenario for that. I really like it. It's also a low drop. It's the one I've been playing. If you've seen our streams, I've been playing it a lot recently. I've had a good time with it. But now the third option is the one I probably will personally play the most, and it's got some sneaky reasons in there too, and that is Kraum Ludovic's Opus. What I love so much about Kraum, it is also that card advantage, and probably more reliable than Ludovic in the sense that you can basically get it everyone's turn by the end of the game. But in addition to all that, the fact that it's a flyer. I know that sounds really simple and kind of ridiculous, but there are so many games, like basically once a week, I feel like I lose a game because I just don't have any flyers on board. I don't have access to flyers. I don't have enough flyers present. And this basically solves that. Having a 5-mana flying hasty commander just sitting there at any point in time, this deck does ramp a good amount. Basically just means you always have a flyer on top of the card advantage. Seems simple, but by the amount of times I've been dying to flyers, by itself has made me want to always have a flyer there. So that's the reason I want Kraum there. Either way, all three of these are going to do a great job at heading the deck with Vial Smasher. It really just comes down to what you feel like the deck is missing. But kind of just a general rundown of the deck is it's basically going to be a Grixis control type shell. So obviously with Sakashima, when you're running the control shell, you're just trying to maximize damage and kind of make it a quicker process to take people out. Whereas if you're going to go Ludovic or Kraum, it's going to be a type of situation where you're trying to get longer game card advantage. So the deck itself might not be as super aggro, 2 Vial Smashers throwing damage, but when you do make it to late game, you're going to have better card advantage. So you do have to make that trade-off for basically speed over the long game. But it is that Grixis control shell. You can go a lot of different directions. The most common directions you'll see with Vial Smasher is either going to be full in on X spells, which I've done in the past, or full in on cheating mana cost. So maybe some of those new free spells from the new Commander product, maybe some stuff where you like Force of Wills and crazy stuff like that. I didn't want to go those directions. I ran some Delve cards like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time to kind of sort of cheat mana cost a little bit. And I run some X spells just because I love X spells, but I didn't go all in on either of those. I just want a lot of instant speed interactions, a lot of cool, fun, splashy cards that I love. And throughout the process of playing these big, cool, splashy things, we're just throwing some Dragonfire around to take everybody's life totals down. That's the thing I love about Vial Smasher in general. If you see this deck list and you say, you know what, it can use more X spells, you can trim some of the fat that I have on here, so to speak, and that the big, ridiculous, splashy things that aren't needed, you can put more X spells in. If you want more mana cheaty effects, cut some of the inefficient counter spells I have and do that. It's very much a flexible skeleton of a deck that you can tweak to your liking, but for me, this is the type of list that I've had the most fun with. So now jumping into the creatures, really the first thing that's going to pop out to you is going to be those clones. I mentioned that regardless of the direction we're going, if Sakashima isn't the commander, we're throwing him in the 99. We also have the other Sakashima the Imposter in there as well. Spark Double is going to be there. And these are really our multiple copies of breaking the legend rule for Vial Smasher. Playing this deck, having 4 Vial Smashers out isn't necessary, but it's fun, which is what matters. So getting all these copies out can be a really good time. If you go the Sakashima route for the deck, you can throw in more cloning copies. If you want to kind of play that glass cannon style, I just wouldn't go too overboard with it. Also in these creatures, we have some of the best ramp creatures available in our colors. One of my favorite things about this deck in general is not having access to green. You need to ramp in more creative ways because really green with Vial Smasher is almost easy mode because you just ramp with sorcery based ramp and then blow people up. This you got to work for. So Burnished Heart, Solemn Simulacrum, Sad Robot, Sad Boy is going to be amazing. Sad Robot is just obviously I feel like it's kind of outclassed by a good number of cards in recent years, but in Grixis, it's still a great option for you here, especially if you go that clown route. You can go clown tribal, I guess that would work. If you go the clone route, it's going to be crazy added value. So I would obviously extra put it in if you have Sakashima at the head as a backup plan. Now we want some big mana options too. So I love Eldrazi, so I'm going to go with cards like Void Winnower and Ulamog, but this is really all about what you want. Any of those Eldrazi, any big, especially big colorless creatures, because a lot of our artifact ramp does produce colorless mana, those are going to be great in this slot. My 2 favorite creatures, though, in this deck are going to be one, Chandra's Incinerator. Chandra's Incinerator is amazing. Now, most of the cards we want to make cheaper are to get big Vial Smasher triggers, but that's not usually the case with Chandra's Incinerator. The way I usually use this card is you get a big Vial Smasher trigger, deal a bunch of damage, and then just play Chandra's Incinerator for 1. And then once you get this out, the card is a house. You are just taking creatures out. One of the frustrating things with Vial Smasher is you're hitting people randomly, but sometimes you want to deal damage to a creature. Chandra's Incinerator takes care of that. Now, the other favorite creature I have is Twilight Prophet. This card is a card I opened a long time ago in a pack and just never found a home for, and this is perfect for it. We have all these huge CMC spells. Most of them we can get discounts on, and all we're looking to do is go ahead and reveal them. It's like a weird version of Yurlok, basically on your upkeep. If you have the City's Blessing, which we should have most of the time, you reveal the top card, drain everyone from life for life, you gain life equal to its CMC. This card can get scary, especially when people start seeing all the overly costed things in your deck, but it is really, really cool. Card advantage, dealing or losing life for your opponents. It's just an all-around. It does what we're trying to do, dealing that non-combat damage that really Vial Smasher thrives with. Now, in the artifacts, we got ramp for days. We are, like I mentioned, we want to ramp a lot because we have a lot of high CMC things. You want to pack it full of mana rocks. You just want mana rocks on mana rocks in this deck. Now, normally in a lot of decks, I kind of base it off the CMC of the commander. You want to make sure this, just throw them in, just throw rocks in. Now, obviously, as many 2 CMC rocks as you can get, put them in, because you get to ramp before your commander even hits the table, which is awesome. But this is the type of deck where I am going to run a Thran Dynamo and a Gilded Lotus. And I know those are cards that I've seen kind of across the board. People are cutting a lot. They're not really as good as those used to be the staple of staples in Commander, and they don't get run as much. I still want them in this deck because we are trying to do some big mana things, and hitting a Gilded Lotus on turn 4 potentially with some of the other ramp can really set you up for a big Vial Smash early on. But my favorite mana rock, basically by a good margin in this deck, is going to be Midnight Clock. It's 3 mana rock just for 1 mana, but the ability for it, and basically it 1, 2, 3 rounds of the table. I had to count 3 rounds of the table with Midnight Clock, and you get a wheel effect. And the reason I love this is a lot of the cards in this deck, if you hit a good hand and get a lot of ramp and play a lot of stuff out, there are so many times where I don't hit the right card draw, or even if we have card advantage on one of our commanders, it may not happen in the way we want it. This is a great way to basically play it and know in however many turns you are going to be wheeling, and you can just play out your hand. Wheel effects I love and I hate. We have a love-hate relationship in that I feel like it helps your opponents too much, because the ability just to draw up to 7 cards is so powerful in Magic, especially if you're in a deck that isn't having crazy card advantage. This is just I'm going to put this in a lot more decks, because just knowing 3 turns ahead that you're going to wheel, change your play patterns. You can play out your hand knowing, okay, that's going to happen and I can refill. A lot of these refill effects are important in this deck, because if we do ramp crazy, we might, even though Vial Smasher wants 1 spell per turn, we may want to get in situations where we're playing 2-3 spells so we can then refill, get the trigger, and do a bunch of stuff on the next turn again. Now, with the enchantments, the 2 staples of staples I feel like in Vial Smasher are Curiosity and then Mind's Dilation. Those are, I feel like, going to be most Vial Smasher builds that include blue, just because they're so powerful. Curiosity, you're drawing cards every time you get a trigger, which is amazing, and I know there's some builds just based solely around that. Mind's Dilation is just such a broken card. It's what I love about Commander, though. It is a 7 CMC do-nothing enchantment until it starts doing something. You can whiff. I think on stream the other night, we had a situation where I think I got 6 lands in a row. Wasn't ideal, but the one card I did hit was a board wipe when I needed it, so it made up for it. Either way, Mind's Dilation is super powerful. The most important thing to me is the fact that you are casting the cards. So basically every turn you have the potential for a Vial Smasher trigger, which by itself is amazing. Doesn't even matter what you hit at that point, doesn't matter what you're casting, you're getting damage around every turn. And if it isn't removed, a lot of the times you might just win the game. Now, 2 of the newer enchantments that I've really enjoyed in this deck are Shark Typhoon, which is just a ridiculous, it's Sharknado. It's basically Sharknado on a card, and it's awesome. Now, I know it's a little expensive now. I'm hoping that changes, but again, I got lucky. I opened this in a pre-release pack, and I've been waiting for a home for it because I just love the concept of throwing sharks around. This is the deck. This is the type of deck for it. We can run so many non-creatures that basically, again, we just want extra benefit for casting big spells. We already are throwing a damage around. Getting a big flyer, again, I talked about flyers before. I'm going to talk about them again. Getting flyers out of it is just amazing, and you're basically getting it for nothing. And another one that I haven't talked about in a few weeks, but I've said before, I'm going to put it in every red deck, is Fiery Emancipation. I just love this card so much. This is such a big, splashy enchantment. It gets removed fast, but the games you do get it out, especially in this type of build, if you get it out and it's not removed even in 1 round of the table, that might mean game over for a player. It is an incredibly powerful card in this deck, because I found in the decks I use it with combat damage, you still have ways around combat damage. Vial Smasher's trigger is incredibly hard to get around if you don't either remove Vial Smasher or have some sort of triggered ability counter, which not really many people run enough of. So this is just such a fun splashy card, and yeah, I stand by it. Basically every red deck I'm going to force this in. It is always a good time. Now onto the sorceries. Really, these instants and sorceries are the soul of this deck. They have the most splashy effects, the coolest effects, really the stuff we're going to be most excited to cast. Now, The one thing that I always talk about is you want to get dual utility in your cards. You want your base, card draw, removal, all that type of stuff, but you want to also have it synergize with your plan. So Bi-Force is a great example that I like to run over Vandal Blast in decks like this. While Vandal Blast is a staple of staples, it's an amazing card, this will allow us to pick and choose what that X is, and if we're in a situation where there's 10 artifacts on board and we got a bunch of mana, we'd rather spend all that to get a big Vial Smasher trigger. Damnable Pact follows that same thought process, where not only is it great card draw for us, we can draw a bunch of cards, maybe lose some life, but we can also use it against another player in the sense that we can target someone with it, make them draw cards, make them lose life, dual utility, throw in damage with Vial Smasher, and again, always just a fun card to play, especially because you can use it politically if you want to help a friend out. Lots of stuff you could do with it, and it's a card I run over or Read the Bones or something in this deck. Jessica's Will is another card that is incredibly powerful in this deck, in that it gives you card advantage, it gives you ramp, it's amazing. And you can get this out early. I did get a chance to cast it early on in a game, and it really pushes you ahead. It's super powerful. And this is a Grixis deck. We already have a lot of card advantage. I just like the card, so I'll put it in. But if you have decks that aren't necessarily having access to black and blue, and you're in red or red and white, this is going to be a staple in those decks. Even in this type of deck, it makes the cut because it's really just that good. This is also a category where you can go into extra turn effects if that's your thing. I only included one in Time Stretch. I normally am very against extra turn effects. I'm normally like mega anti-extra turn, just because when I see people do it, it typically turns into 30 minutes of just sitting there watching someone play solitaire, which is not my favorite thing. But extra turns with a purpose are a little different, and especially a deck like this, your extra turns are going to be fast. If you get a chance again to check out some of the gameplay videos with this deck, I've cast a few extra turn spells. It's literally Time Stretch, Vial Smasher, pass to next turn, cast a spell, Vial Smasher, pass the next turn, cast a spell, Vial Smasher. You're not worried about trying to sit there and get 3 turns to accumulate value. You just really want the Vial Smasher triggers. So even if your playgroup is against extra turn spells, use the play pattern of essentially just getting the extra triggers, make them quick, and it's more of a painless process than some of the other occasions where those might be cast. Now, the instants are my absolute favorite. I love the instants because you want to be casting stuff at instant speed. Obviously, we're going to be running the Vidalcanoris and the Leyline of Anticipations. I left those out earlier, but I kind of wanted to group those with the instants because we want to be casting everything at instant speed if possible. We want to be able to cast a spell on each person's turn. That's why we loved Mind's Dilation so much. We want to maximize our Vial Smasher triggers and get them off when we need them to get off. So instant speed stuff is perfect. Also, we want to have answers. We want to have lots of instant speed interaction, whether it's removal or counter spells. One thing I will say about counter spells, though, that I found that really helps this deck play in a variety of different power level metas is run versatile counter spells that don't necessarily have to counter things. It may sound ridiculous, but stuff like Thassa's Intervention, Mystic Confluence, Sublime Epiphany, there's quite a few. Basically, almost all my counter spells I'm running are those category of cards, which mean they're cards that can counter spells, but they can also do other things. And the best example is Mystic Confluence, in that if you hold 5 mana up for your Vial Smasher and you hold up a Mystic Confluence, you always are going to get something out of it. Let's use Desertion as an example, which is a high CMC counter spell that I used to love in Vial Smasher decks. The thing is, you have to counter someone's spell. So if you're playing in a lower powered meta, or maybe you're in a situation where you don't want to kind of take away from someone else's game plan, you want to see what they're doing, Desertion kind of puts you into a situation where you have to counter it, or any number of counter spells. You have no other option. If you want that trigger, you have to counter somebody's spell. With Mystic Confluence, you don't have to. If you don't want to be that guy at the table that's going to attract attention to yourself for countering something that really doesn't need to be countered, you know what? Spend 5 mana, draw 3 cards. Same with Sublime Epiphany, and same with Thassa's Intervention. You get this whole dig through time type effect with Thassa's Intervention if you don't feel like countering something. Kind of as a general thing, if you're trying to build decks that are good in a variety of power level metas, getting these modal cards that give you options on how they can be played are a great way. I've had a lot of success in this deck. I was on stream with the Spike Feeders a few weeks ago, and they were playing very high power decks, and I was able to use these counter spells as counter spells. I was able to remove things, stop things. It felt like I was sort of knew what I was doing. But at the same time, I could play in the stoppiest of metas, just draw some cards with Mystic Confluence. I could just use Thassa's Intervention for some card advantage and not stop everyone else. I do just really feel like, for me personally, I have a lot more fun in games where I get those options to kind of choose to remove stuff, but not feeling like I'm forced to just because I held up mana. But yeah, we are running other types of counter spells, stuff like Mind Swipe and Spell Swindle to synergize so well. One's an X spell so we can make it as big as we want and double burn someone. Spell Swindle ramps us in a way. These are just great cards. My two favorite instants by a wide margin, because most of them I could go, you can see the deck list, it's basically just all removal and interaction. That's all it's about, because we don't really run a ton of creatures and we're not gonna have a huge board presence. This is all about survival. We have a lot of these spells here just to make sure when people try to murder us because Vial Smasher's hitting them a few too many times, we have answers to stop it. But my two favorite instants, one is Fury Storm. Fury Storm is silly. This card is ridiculous, absolutely insane, especially with partner commanders. You are going to be copying a spell quite a few times, and this is especially true if you're going the Vial Smasher Ludovic route, maybe even Sakashima, the lower CMC partners, because you can cast them 3-4 times combined by the end of the game, and Fury Storm can just win you the game. This card is absolutely crazy. Definitely put it in every partner deck with red, and you're going to find just wins out of nowhere. Now, and the other one that I just love so much and that I just get really excited every chance I get to cast it is Electro Dominance. But Electro Dominance is just a silly card. We can throw a lot of damage around, and the great thing about this is it finally lets us target that damage. So much of our damage is random. Being able to target it, this is a great way to kind of take a player out that you've been hitting on and off throughout the game, take a big scary creature out, or sneak out a scary permanent that you didn't want to play at sorcery speed. Now with the lands, my favorite thing from changing Vial Smasher to 4-3 colors was the mana base. It got a whole lot simpler. Run as many basics and everything as you want. At this point, I think the card is kind of spiked, but Winding Canyons, which used to be a pretty cheap card, if you have one, throw it in. I love this card in here because it gives you, we don't have a lot of creatures, but it will let you play Vial Smasher herself at instant speed, so you can flash her in before your turn, make sure you don't have to waste a turn casting her and not get the trigger. But overall, mana base, again, 3 colors or less, lots of basics. If you have access to shocks, fetches, awesome. If not, basics, some cheap duels, and even some evolving wilds and things are going to do you just fine. But now, let us get into the best part of every deck tech and the most exciting part, the fieriest part, in this case, the lava-iest part, whatever the dragon fieriest part, I guess, is the game-winning step. We are about to throw some vials around, burn some people down, and have just a blast with our girl Vial Smasher. Now, the primary way to win the game, by far, is going to be with Dragonfire. We are trying to just throw vials around. I've built this deck specifically so that is basically the way we're going to win. If we don't win throwing vials around, it's not likely we're going to win. There's not really many other ways that we are trying to do damage to people. Now, there's some backup cards that we'll get into, but that is what I wanted more than anything in this deck, was specifically for Vial Smasher to be the primary win con, the secondary, tertiary, ordinary? Sounds right. Whatever it is, we want Vial Smasher to be doing it for us, and that's what I wanted this deck to be focused on. We have plenty of big CMC spells, we have plenty of instant speed things, and the way the deck plays out, you cast stuff early, you cast stuff often, you're throwing that damage around throughout the game, and your goal, and that's the one super scary thing about Vial Smasher that I don't think I should be telling people because I play it so much. While there's 3 other opponents, it's perfectly a fair and balanced card. When you get to 2 other opponents, all of a sudden that damage is starting to hit them more often, because I guess, you know, percentages. And then when you get down to 1 opponent, it's just straight not fair. It is crazy. It is insane because it's basically, there's a reason why Vial Smasher was banned in Dual Commander, I think is what it's called, whatever the one-on-one commander is. There's a reason for that, because every spell dealing direct damage, the game is just going to end fast. So it is the type of deck where, yeah, it speeds up. If you're able to make it to the final 2 or 3 players, Vial Smasher, she's going to do some work. That is basically the way we're going to win every game. There's not really much of a backup plan here, but there are some just very powerful cards that can warp the game enough if you get into a late game situation to kind of get you home. And that primary one is going to be Karavek. Karavek's basically like a backup Vial Smasher except for your opponent's spells. This is something, if you get in a late game situation where you're trying to pull a game out, getting out of Karavek basically just makes it so hard for your opponents to cast spells. That stuff will get scary. In this same category, we do have stuff like an Ulamog, or if you throw in, you can throw in an Emrakul, or I'm playing Voidwind, where we have some big Eldrazi's and big scary creatures that if we do our Vial Smasher thing throughout the game, we can get in for enough damage to where endgame, just a big scary creature with all the removal we have might be enough to get home. But again, the whole purposes of this deck is for Vial Smasher to be the win con, and I really wanted to stick to that. Now that is going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. As I've said, Vial Smasher is one of my favorite decks I've ever built. Every iteration I love so much, and this is just an incredibly fun deck with basically whichever commander you choose for it. Let me know in the comments below which of the 3 commanders you would go with, though. I'm really curious to kind of see what direction people are leaning. I would assume Sakashima because it's newer, but I'm curious to know. As always, a huge shout out to all the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. and so many exciting things to come. Like I said, I'm gonna be in a little bit of a different setup for a little while, but I will still, don't worry, gameplay streams, nothing like that stopping. So make sure you check us out 8:30 p.m. every Saturday. We will be streaming. Always a good time. Come hang out, come check out the Petty, and come check out this Vial Smasher deck, because I play it a lot. Also, one last thing before we wrap up, I did want to go ahead and mention, I don't know when this video is releasing, so I hope it's not too late, but do check out the professor's most recent video. He has been working with Princess and Sed and Ken on helping to donate just a whole bunch of money to charity. It is awesome. It is amazing. Long story short, basically they're raising a whole bunch of money for the Trans Women of Color Collective and for Saving Our Sons and Sisters International. Professor is much more eloquent and well-spoken than I am, so go ahead and check out the professor's video to get the whole rundown on that. It is just an amazing thing, and if you're able to, definitely go ahead and donate. But that's all for this week. So many exciting things to come, so many deck techs to come. But until then, I will see y'all next time.